This episode of Gators Breakdown is brought to you by UFM Underwear. Head to ufmunderwear.com and use promo code BREAKDOWN for $5 off your purchase. UFM Underwear, support your manhood. And the Gators Breakdown podcast is ready to go after Florida wins and beats Miami 24-20 in the opening week 0 game of the season. And joining me on this Miami game reaction episode is Will Sammon from The Athletic. Will, Florida survives in a 24-20 win. It was a game of sloppiness and lack of focus at times. Gators didn't let up, found a way to win this one. There'll be some overreaction out there to just one game, but there shouldn't be any overreacting by not enjoying this victory from players, coaches, fans. Fans, players, and coaches need to enjoy this win over a rival.
No doubt. I think you put it well with the word survive at first, because that's exactly what they did. I mean, they survived it because Miami was a pretty good team, and they are. And I think that Miami is going to, in a few weeks from now, sooner rather than later, end up in the top 25 because they're that good, And I think that Florida fans kind of lose sight of that a little bit when you look at and you start to analyze some of the different areas of that game, whether it was Florida's inability to get the run game going or their pass protection or Feleipe Franks. You forget that, hey, this was a really good Miami defense that they played against. And I know that maybe Florida fans don't want to give some Miami that much credit there, but they're pretty good. They're pretty sound, and they know what they're doing. And they came in with a really good game plan and stacking the box and making things really difficult for Florida to get anything going offensively. So I give a lot of credit to Miami for the way they played, and their redshirt freshman quarterback I thought was pretty impressive for a guy who was sacked 10 times and faced pressure nonstop. I mean, that kid impressed me. He had a nice little game too, and it was some smart game planning on their part offensively. So survived, like you said at the beginning, man. That's really the right way to put it. Just because Miami gave it their all, and Florida kind of withstood it and was still the better team at the end of the game.
Yeah, I'm glad you said it that way too, because in a way. And survive is not necessarily a negative term there. You found a way to win the game. Expectations coming into the season, and a lot of expectations were around Florida to win by a couple scores here. All in all, we've all discussed it. Look, I mean, don't get me wrong. I think you did too, and I know I picked a couple score. Florida wins by a couple scores. But we all did say this Miami defense would be, would and could be a problem, and more so, Florida and self-inflicted wounds too. We'll get to all that, but Miami was bringing a defense and a way to keep that game close, like they did.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we could definitely talk about those self-inflicted problems because, maybe the game's a little bit different and maybe the game planning is different from there on out if those fumbles don't occur because, Miami didn't score promptly off that first one, but that really halted the momentum of one of Florida's drives. They were deep in their territory when that happened, and that just really halted whatever momentum that they had. I'm not the biggest believer in, say, momentum, but they were right there. So, I mean, that was a scoring opportunity gone for you. I mean, we saw a bunch of different things. I don't know exactly what you want to hit on first here because there's so many different areas that you can go to, David. But I mean, at the end of the day, though, it's would Florida fans sign up for 1-0, a 24-20 victory over Miami? Maybe at the beginning of the year, a couple of months ago, or even maybe a couple of weeks ago, for that matter, you wish for that 2-score outcome, and like you said, I kind of thought it would be at least a 10-point game for Florida. But man, this isn't exactly Charleston Southern that you played in the opener. You know what I mean? So you kind of have to take what you get there and just say to yourselves, okay, this was a win. There's a bye week now for you to sort of clean up your mistakes, go over the film. And that's what this game sort of provides you with, is that it gives you that learning experience early in the year that a lot of teams don't have right now. And so instead of going to the film and watching a game against an FCS opponent where you really can't get a whole lot out of, hey, it's August 25th and you have an opportunity to review some mistakes against a high caliber team and sort of fix some problems that you have, or not problems per se, but some issues that need some corrections or just some areas of improvement.
Yeah, and the thing is, you can say you played bad and you still found a way to win. So it's a lot. It's probably better today that they're looking at film knowing there was a W behind that and not a loss. But we'll get into all of it coming up. We'll go over the game and get our thoughts for certain situations, certain players, and all that. But before we do, remember you can find Gators Breakdown on news4jacks.com/Gators Breakdown. You'll find all the Gators Breakdown episodes as well as articles from the News4Jacks sports team. Also, catch the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or YouTube. When using those services, please share, rate, and review Gators Breakdown. And on social media, follow Gators Breakdown on Twitter and Facebook at Gators Breakdown. And also, it came out last week, exclusive News4Jacks exclusive, Talking with Troop. Former Gators tight end Ben Troop will join me every week. It'll probably be midweek for on News4Jacks and gives his thoughts. Only like Ben can. So he brings it every time he's on. You can catch that every week exclusively on news4jacks.com/Gators Breakdown. So, well, it did start good for the Gators, and I figured in my preview last week, I did say Dan Enos would draw up a good offensive first drive. That's kind of seems to be his MO there, and that's what he did for Miami. And but Florida does make them settle for a field goal, and then the first offensive possession for the Gators, they convert a fake punt, and then very next play, Tony takes a screen 66 yards. Marched the first quarter touchdown versus the FBS opponent since the Tennessee game last season. So, it was good to get off to a great start, but it didn't necessarily translate into a scoring frenzy. Will, the first touchdown of the season was to a player the fans want to see the ball in his hands more, and Frank's longest touchdown pass of his career.
Yeah, and it was off a screen. So how about that? Right? For all the talk about Franks' arm strength, and rightfully so, it was off a screen, and that matters because Florida's wide receivers as a whole, they ranked in the top 20 last year in yards after catch, and that speaks to their explosiveness and their ability to kind of create explosive plays on their own with just the ball in their hand. And that's what I'd like to see more of, and what I would have preferred to have seen more of just even last night with more passes like that. I'm just like. That's part of the game plan where I got kind of confused is like why they sort of like went away from that or why they just didn't keep going to that because I felt like that was there for a bit of time. And, we even saw them have a little bit of success on the perimeter with Tony with some sweeps and even Pirine for that matter. It was the runs inside where like they really had nothing going on in there. And they really couldn't take advantage of the one-on-one matchups with Feleipe Franks and a couple of guys on the outside that they tried early on too. But yeah, that first drive, man, that's kind of like what everybody would have signed up for at the beginning of the game. Quick, efficient, and explosive with a guy that you want to see in Kadarius Toney. And then defensively, it was not surprising to see the screens. I wrote about that a lot the other day heading into the game from Dan Enos, especially with a young quarterback. You don't want him throwing the ball downfield and taking too many risks there. So I was kind of surprised that Florida wasn't like playing a little bit more press in that situation. They backed up a little bit, sort of allowing it to happen and unfold slightly. They shored it up though afterward and kind of corrected that and made the adjustment. But yeah, they were able to kind of go downfield pretty efficiently in their own right with Miami, and it kind of made things for a little bit concerning. But again, you point to that ability to thwart touchdowns in the red zone. That was something that they were really good at last year. A very good team as far as not allowing teams to score touchdowns once they reached the red zone, and that happened a couple of times last night as well. So again, that speaks to their resolve defensively as a unit to kind of just stay strong once they're in that sort of situation.
Yeah, and then after that first touchdown for the Gators offense, you kind of alluded to it. Defense forced a 3-and-out after that, and the offense gets the ball, has a nice drive going on, and knocking on the door to score again. Feleipe Franks to Michael Pirine can't figure out a handoff, and Miami recovers the fumble. Will, you kind of alluded to this before we got into it. It did seem at that point, it looked like Florida was about to go up 2 scores, and that fumble just changed kind of the complexion of the game from there on out. Even though Miami goes 3-and-out again, Florida on the very first play of the next offensive drive, and Malik Davis not being able to handle a pitch, ball shoots around everywhere, and looks like Florida recovers, but Miami comes out of the pile and gets a fumble recovery. And at that point, Will, Miami's getting amped up. Florida's had some self-inflicted errors here, and after the first 2 drives where Florida went 5 plays for 79 yards for a touchdown, then the 12-play, 51-yard drive that ended in that first fumble, after those first 2 drives, the next 3 drives of the first half, 1 play, -8 yards with the Davis fumble. 3-play, 7-yard drive, then a 4-play, 15-yard drive, and only that was with only 45 seconds left before halftime. So, kind of a throwaway drive there, but still, so really only 4 drives in the first half because of turnovers, and all that gave Miami some momentum with more chances to make something happen. And going back to the preview last week, I thought if Florida could get up by a couple scores early, then the chances of winning by a couple scores were really good. So that was probably the most frustrating part, because that game that was really almost there, but that first turnover kind of just changed everything.
Yeah, no doubt. And I wish I would have been able to sort of ask Feleipe Franks exactly like what the issue was there, because I don't want to place blame on the wrong person. Usually, I would assume it's the quarterback in that situation, where it's sort of that read handoff situation, and you have to either pull it or give it to the running back. And it looked like there was probably a miscommunication there. So although I don't want to really assume like what the issue was, you could kind of piece it together and figure it out. But yeah, I didn't get the opportunity to talk to him about that particular play. So hopefully sometime during this bye week, we get a hold of him and we can talk a little bit more about that and just kind of be a little bit more informed and just get his take on it. Because that was surprising to see, because that was a play that really worked out. I mean, that's a bread and butter thing for them last year. And then even that pitch, I know Malik Davis is somebody who missed all of last year pretty much. That's something that they work on all the time, that pitch play. And so that was a little bit interesting to kind of see that unfold the way it did too. So, when you look at those things, those are the things where I was tweeting earlier this morning about just correctable mistakes or issues that can be fixed. To me, those are two things that I look at that are like, okay, how many times is that going to happen over the course of a game? I know turnovers are part of the game, but like in those particular ones, I'm not sure how often we're going to see that from Florida, just because those are things that they practice so much. And I was pretty surprised to see that. Like, I mean, you're going to see interceptions, you're going to see that sort of thing sometimes, but those particular fumbles and mistakes, I wasn't too. I was pretty surprised, to put it simply, on those.
Yeah, me too. It's especially with all the the one thing we could point to for Florida this year was experienced skill players, and there was experienced skill players causing or getting the mistakes called on them. So caught in the mistakes. So yeah, it was really surprising. But hopefully it's just the first game ugliness, sloppiness, and as you said, credible mistakes. They get it and move on from there. When we get to the second half, and except for one Miami touchdown drive, the Gators defense really clamped down. 10 sacks over the night, 6 in the second half, 16 tackles for loss. The one Miami touchdown drive was 75 yards in the second half. But besides that, the defense held Miami to these totals on drives: -1, 4, 15, 29, and the last drive of the game, 14 yards. But, Miami was driving due to pass interference calls and a lot of penalties there. So for the game, Will, the defense gave up scoring drives of 56 yards in a field goal, 27 yards in a field goal, 90 yards in a touchdown, 75 yards in the touchdown. Looking at those numbers and just kind of reading them on the surface there, it really is surprised that Miami was really able to, in two touchdown drives there, 75 yards and 90 yards. You kind of look at it at that point, you got them where you want them. Your defense has got them in great field position, and they go for long scoring drives.
Well, here's the thing: like, where would that defense be if there weren't that many missed tackles over the course of last night? You know what I mean? With that one 50-yard touchdown play in particular, the running back, I think, broke 4 or 5 tackles, and it was not even like that he was being all that shifty or that elusive. In my opinion, it was almost as if they just, I don't want to say gave up on the play, but a little bit less effort than what we were accustomed to seeing from Florida's defense on that particular run. And so, yeah, that was kind of a bit mind-boggling, just to see like that many missed tackles and what the issue was. But I will say this, David, that's the case for a lot of teams early on in the season.
Yeah.
This isn't something that's like suddenly a new phenomenon here. I mean, you could probably go back to the Charleston Southern game even last year, and
for sure, yeah.
Okay, this was probably an issue. Off the top of my head, just like anecdotally, I could feel a little bit safe remembering that was a bit of an issue, and certainly it reoccurred against Kentucky early on in the year too, and sometimes you are fearful of that because the year prior it was a season-long issue for Florida in 2017. But with these guys, I just don't see that happening. Just because look, they're a lot of the same players from last year. We know what they're capable of, and I will just toss that up to some sloppiness out of a week 0 matchup in late August, because the defense really did play pretty well.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly with that pass rush, man. That was
Oof.
impressive. And I know it was against a pretty inexperienced offensive line as far as the tackles go, and they really feasted off those guys. But that's exactly what you wanted to see. And I think people were a little bit surprised about just how good Jabari Zuniga and Jonathan Grenard looked. I know people expected for them to be okay there, and for that loss of Ja'Kai Polite not to really be that significant, even though he led them in sacks, tackles for loss, and all that good stuff. Just because you believe in Todd Grantham and his track record, and you knew what you had coming back and what you brought in with Jonathan Grenard. So you felt probably pretty good about that if you're a Florida fan. But then to kind of see it actually unfold and to look as good as it did, because if you look back at that last drive, for example, it wasn't like Todd Grantham was bringing the house on these plays. I mean, he was rushing 4 guys for the most part, and it was really Zuniga operating alongside Kyrie Campbell and Jonathan Grenard on that line, and then they were probably blitzing somebody like a David Reese or a Ventrell Miller or a Jeremiah Moon. So it was mostly like 4 or 5 guys at max that were rushing. So again, it was good to see, because some guys did end up making some plays that were a little bit unexpected too, like a Ventrell Miller, for example.
Yes, I mean, at least when we can discuss what that pass rush was doing, at least that was one part of the game we did forecast going into this game, and it actually showed up. It was, Florida didn't win by 2 scores. We expected the offense. And we'll get into Feleipe Franks here next. We expected him maybe to take a next step, but the one thing that did show up that everybody was forecasting was this Florida defensive line being a mismatch for this young Miami offensive line, and it did not disappoint. I don't know if I saw 10 sacks coming, but I definitely saw, a lot of pressure being made, and those guys living in the backfield. And it was funny. Will Miles and I did our over/under stuff last week. We put the number for 30 over/under for sacks on the season. Well, Florida's only got 20 more to match that now.
Yeah, I mean, if you put the over, if you put some money on that, man, you must be really good, right? The over on what they had last year, like 37 sacks.
Yeah, 37. Yep.
If you put the over on that, I mean, after this, I mean, they're feeling pretty good, because you got 10 sacks and you got 2 FCF. Man, looking pretty good for that over if you play some money on that. But yeah, man, I mean, it was good from that instance, because it was also a variety of guys.
Yeah.
We mentioned those 2 in particular, Zuniga and Grenard, and they certainly got theirs. But I thought Campbell did pretty well. I thought he went under the radar in commanding some double teams, and also freeing himself up on those 2 and getting to the quarterback. I think he had maybe 1 sack. And again, I point to Miller's speed. I mean, that really jumped out to me right away. He had that early sack. He had I think a sideline to sideline stop where he made a shoestring tackle to force a 3rd and long situation early on too. And then he appeared late in coverage as well during that final drive, where he helped make a stop in the end zone on a deep pass with the game on the line. So I mean, I can't say enough good things about Ventrell Miller. I thought he came away one of the most impressive guys, and by that same token, Jeremiah Moon played well too.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was really interesting who was on the field when the game was on the line for Florida's defense. That's something that a lot of people weren't really talking too much about, but we saw Sean Davis make a play. Taylor was on the field. I mentioned Ventrell Miller and Moon, and those 3 guys on the line. Plus, you had those 2 corners and Dean. So certainly, it looked like those were the guys that Todd Grantham was, most sort of reliant on during that game, and they showed up for him, no doubt.
Absolutely. I mean, Juwan Taylor, yeah. Let's see. I was pulling it up here because you just mentioned the guys I remember looking at earlier. Juwan Taylor, Ventrell Miller, Kyrie Campbell, Grenard Zuniga, all had 6 tackles. So, and that led the way. And then Marco Wilson and David Reese with 5 tackles, and a slew of guys with 4 and 3. So multiple tackles and a high amount of tackles from, a few of those guys, 5, 6 of those guys getting 6 tackles. So, yeah, I mean, you mentioned the names that were out there. And like you, I think I was going to save this for later when we go and discuss players because I want to get into Feleipe Franks here, but I'll continue the Ventrell Miller talk here. He set a career high with 6 tackles, 2 sacks. We talked about Amari Burney in that spot a whole lot this offseason, and it's Ventrell Miller who really showed out this game from that money linebacker spot. And he was in there early and some early downs, some early running downs. They took him out on third down a couple of times, and that's when Burney would come in a lot. And I know we like Burney's speed, and they're probably in passing situations, he's probably more fit for that role, because that was a question I had about Amari Burney coming into this game and as a linebacker is, can he hold up by getting hit by offensive linemen and running backs time and again, and then very next play either have to split out wide and cover a tight end or cover a tight end who's on the end of a line? You're asking that linebacker to do a lot of roles, and he's not used to necessarily getting hit play after play after play and then having to go cover a tight end. But then Ventrell Miller, I mean, we heard rave reviews all throughout fall camp that these young linebackers behind Burney and Reese were really impressing. And game one, Ventrell Miller's name is called a lot.
Yeah, I mean, how great is that for Florida? Because you mentioned, what kind of toll does that take on Burney, and what can he give you from game to game, and how consistent can he be? How much can you rely on him? Well, that question isn't as major of a concern if what you're getting at Ventrell Miller, what you got out of Ventrell Miller last night, translate into like a weekly consistent thing, because he'll supply you a really good sort of foil to what Amari Burney can supply you with. And I saw somebody tweet at both of us earlier today asking about Burney in particular.
Yeah.
And, he did play. I was talking to Thomas Goldcamp actually at 247 about this, and he brought up a really good point that I agree with, and that Burney could sometimes play like a quiet game where, you don't really see him. He doesn't really stand out. Maybe the ball isn't thrown his way. He's still doing his job, I feel like. It's not like he's getting beat there. It's not like he's getting missed assignments or anything like that. So I think sometimes he just doesn't really show up. And he plays more of like a quiet game. It doesn't necessarily mean that he's playing badly. But yeah, I think that he just has that sort of style where he kind of does his thing sometimes, and it's easy to kind of overlook him. And he certainly didn't play as much as Ventrell Miller did either. So I think that was a big part of it. Mm-hmm. But again, I mean, if you're getting the production, why change it? I mean, Ventrell Miller did everything that you asked of the kid.
Absolutely. So, of course, we got to get to Feleipe Franks and what he did for the night, and of course that probably one of the bigger topics for the night. And I thought he played okay in the first half, and nothing really jumped out, good or bad, in the first half. Then we get to the second half, and we get the inconsistent Franks in the second half that we've come to know. A high throw to Freddie Swain that maybe could have been caught, but would have been a tough catch. I originally thought, watching the replay there in the stadium, it should have been a catch after only seeing the replay once, but questionable either way. I think it would have been tough to come down with. It definitely should have been thrown earlier, and it was there because the defender fell down. But for Feleipe Franks, his next chance, he gets up, throws a beautiful deep ball to Josh Hammond. Look the safety off to his left. Hammond had a step, and that sets up for a Florida touchdown a few plays later. And look, he had trouble with deep passes last year and last season. So that was nice to see in the first game that he can connect down the field. And then 4.5 minutes to go in the game, Will, and Florida takes over with a chance to salt the game away, up 24-20. Look, we know Florida wasn't running the ball well. Mullen felt really comfortable about putting the ball in Feleipe Franks' hands. He gets hit as he's trying to throw the ball out of bounds. That's what Mullen said after the game. It floats. It gets picked off. So I don't know if you can necessarily ping that one on him too much. If he's trying to just get rid of the ball, he gets hit and it floats a little bit. I'm not going to put that one too much on him, but I just didn't like throwing the ball on that first down in the first place. But Mullen trusted the situation. It came back to bite Florida. It all worked out in the end. Miami misses a field goal. Florida goes on to win. And we know what was a clunky game because there wasn't enough plays. But everyone was waiting to see if Feleipe Franks has improved, could improve, will improve. As I said, he did some good things, did some bad things. Pretty much the same quarterback last night he has been. I don't think the opinion has much really changed on him as what he is, as mainly just labeling him he's the exact same right now after one game in the 2019 season. So I don't think it was a terrible performance, but I think the expectations getting higher for him really plays a part here in how you view his performance.
Definitely. In a perfect world, what I think Florida fans wanted to see was some connections on a couple of deep passes. You wanted to see him not make some silly mistakes. You wanted to see him take charge, look confident, and really not second guess anything he did after the game. I think that was like, if you wanted a checklist of things that Florida fans wanted to see from Feleipe Franks, that was it. And I think that people are a little bit frustrated or slightly disappointed at the very least, just because they weren't able to put checks on those boxes after watching that game. And they people wanted to, because for a long time we've been hearing since really that Michigan game and into the spring and into training camp about his improvement, his overall increase of knowledge of the offense. And like you're saying, he didn't exactly, in my opinion, play terribly. I don't think he played bad, really. I just think it was an uneven performance, and it was just too similar to what we saw last year. Because at this point, people can say and point to Feleipe Franks and say, okay, we know what we're getting out of him, and that's kind of fair, because he has not recently taken that next step, although he still has a lot of time to do so. People sort of like lose sight of that, but at the same time, people expect more, like you're saying, David, and those expectations are only going to get higher and higher the more Florida continues to win too. I think that it's cool that Florida wins and maybe he has an uneven performance, but people get restless after that and they want to see more from him, because people understand that, okay, it's going to take a little bit more to beat a team like Georgia or a team like LSU at LSU. So that's what people are sort of riled up about, and I understand their point of view on that. But you can't say that you're really that surprised at the same time, because he's still again, I mean, these are things that I've said before. For all the talk that we heard over the spring and over training camp about his improvement, we still hadn't seen it. We still hadn't seen him go against a live rush, and this was his opportunity in this game. And again, I go back to the fact that this was a good team. This was a good defense that he went up against, and so it's not as if he was playing some cupcake and he sort of had an uneven performance and everybody's sort of questioning him. He didn't light it up against a great defense, and so you could interpret that the way you want to, or how you can, and you could sort of build your definition of Feleipe Franks however you want to see fit, because you could say, okay, you could go as far as to say he's like, okay, this is the Achilles heel of this team, but at the same time, you could point to his ability to bounce back and his ability to show some resolve and not be the reason why you lost the game. So I mean, it kind of really depends on your point of view with him at this point, but it is growing to become, hey, this is who Feleipe Franks is at this point.
Yeah, and I don't know. I have to kind of go back and look at the game some more, and maybe why he didn't run more, maybe why there wasn't more. Because him running and him with his legs opens up the offense a little more. And Miami, as we said, stacked the box to stop the run game. So that probably played a part in how much we saw or lack of Feleipe Franks running there. He had passing plays of 66 and 65 yards, and he had 2 passing plays of 60-plus yards all of last season. The Gators did. So 254 passing yards, tied his third highest single game total. He had 284 at Vandy last year, 274 Idaho, and 254 versus FSU. And then kind of going with the turnovers, Feleipe Franks, kind of involved in those. Florida committed multiple turnovers just 3 times last year. Kentucky, Vandy, Georgia, lost 2 of those games. And its only game with 3 turnovers last season was Vanderbilt. So Frank's lost fumble early in the second quarter was his first turnover since losing a fumble on his own 1-yard line against Georgia last year. And the interception in the fourth quarter snapped a streak of 157 consecutive attempts without an interception. So, Will, I mean, that's the frustrating part there too. I mean, it had been so long, and we always talk about that stretch at the end of the season, but still there were turnovers there that didn't happen later in the season. And I thought Florida might come out a little aggressive in this game with the offensive game plan, especially early on, like I said, to maybe make Miami try and fight from behind there. But these turnovers weren't because of aggression. It was just, and we've already kind of alluded to it, just some sloppy play.
Yeah, and again, I think Miami's game plan was pretty good though too. I mean, they forced him to roll out and move to his left, and that clearly is a weakness for Feleipe Franks, where he just does not look as comfortable going in that direction and throwing on the run as he is to say like the right side of his right side and making those type of throws. So you got to give a lot of credit to Miami, and they have such a good defense that I know I've kind of mentioned that point a bunch already, but it's just you got to put that in perspective when you're analyzing this game and his performance. And I think you're right with those mistakes. We could kind of detail them and point to them, but they weren't happening in those 4 games. So it is kind of concerning when you look at it going forward. But again, I mean, it's not as if he's not going to be the guy next game. So he is who Florida is going with, and Dan Mullen continues to think that he is their best option to win games, and he has not only the backing of Dan Mullen but also his teammates. I mean, we saw a couple of guys on Twitter even speak out for him, so clearly he has that going for him too.
There's a couple more stats from the defense here. Gators held Miami to 2 of 13 on third downs. That was 15.4%. The only opponent Florida held under 16% on third down last season was FSU. We talked about the sacks, and the Gators finished with 5+ sacks for the 6th time in 14 games under defensive coordinator Todd Grantham. 10 sacks versus Miami. Of course, Miller led the way there with 2. Most sacks, Will, for an SEC team since 2008.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty astounding. I mean, it's pretty incredible when you look at that. I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I don't know too many people who entered this game thinking that they were going to get that many. The pressure was also pretty cool. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, I think Todd Grantham really mixed it up pretty well. We saw Sean Davis come out on blitzes and make a couple of stops. Maybe he didn't quite get to the quarterback, but he altered some throws, and sometimes that's just as important.
Trey Dean got his first sack.
That too, yeah. So he mixed it up quite a bit. I mean, David Reese was blitzing there too a little bit toward the end. So he really did a good job of disguising. He often does, and sort of getting guys to show blitz, and they drop back into coverage, and that speaks to their versatility too, and guys who can do that, who are trained to do that. So there's some things to like about the defense. I know that there were some issues where they gave up some big plays, and again, we saw the missed tackles. That's pretty inexcusable. But there is still some things to like, and not for nothing, but you really probably didn't even get the best game that you probably could out of that secondary, because although C.J. Henderson made a couple of plays, neither of the corners were able to reel off a pick or have a huge game, although they both played pretty well. So there's still an area that this Florida defense can get to, and so for this game to have both people sort of kind of comment on and say that, hey, the missed tackles were horrendous, and we got to clean these safety issues up and all that. For them to still come away with that kind of performance and have people talk about that kind of speaks to their potential as well.
Absolutely. So, Will, let's get to. I was going to add some quick hitter notes here, but I think we can hit some of these quick hitter notes and what some of the feedback we got from some of the Gators Breakdown listeners here. So let me get to these tweets here when I asked everybody to send their reactions in for this first reaction show of the season here. So let's go. A lot of guys sent some good tweets here. Dustin Warbright says, here we go. Lots of issues that need to be addressed, but they are all fixable. Need more games to know if we're worse than we thought or if Miami's better than we thought. Bottom line is we're still on track for all 3 of our goals and got the W. Now 3 weeks to address things before Kentucky. And that is the thing. We did discuss all these issues. Most of these issues are fixable. But the part I really like, and I think we got to remember, is there's a lot of overreaction after one game, and especially the only game on TV at that time. So you're going to have Georgia fans, you're going to have FSU fans, you're going to have rival fans coming in and kind of stirring things in the same way. They're going to overreact just like a lot of Gator fans are going to overreact, positively or negatively there. So it is, Miami, especially with their schedule, 3-4 weeks from now could be ranked with some good wins behind it. They got North Carolina, I believe, next. That's their opponent. So it'd be interesting to watch that and see how they bounce back here. But, it's going to take a few weeks to kind of know what this means go back and just look at last year and Florida's early struggle against Kentucky and the way they bounced back and ended up with 10 wins on the season. It's just, I don't want to say you can't take too much from this, but you can and can't at the same time. It's just a mixed bag, and we really don't know until we play some more games.
Well, also the thing is though too is that nothing really surprised you. I felt like in
No,
last
yeah.
game, it's like you knew that you knew what you were getting out of Feleipe Franks for the most part. I mean, like I mentioned earlier, that people had hope that there would be a vast improvement, but it just doesn't really work out that way. Like I just didn't really expect for that to necessarily happen or anticipate that. You would think he's slightly better naturally, sure, in his progression and as a quarterback, but he wasn't all of a sudden just going to, throw for 350 and go, 25 for 30. I mean, that's just not, it's not going to happen for him. And also just the offensive line too. Like you knew that that's going to be a work in progress, especially against that sort of defense. So there were issues running the ball and in pass protection a little bit. That was not something that was largely unexpected. And then also people talking about the safety concerns. You were also playing without Brad Stewart, who's probably your best safety. So that's another thing that, you can't really throw your hands up and say, wow, didn't see that coming. These are all things that, that if you're a Florida fan, you're probably well versed in. And so at this point, you shouldn't be surprised that these are things that you need to fix or at least improve.
Yeah, absolutely. Move on to the next one. And Gator Girl 888 and at M Quinn says tackling and taking care of the ball was part of her reaction. Will, something I think we really do need to discuss here. Didn't seem to take advantage of our quote get it to guys. Was this O-line play calling, or both? Hope this leads to improvements over the bye week. And a lot of people after the game asked me where Jacob Copeland was. It seems like that question never ends. Where's Jacob Copeland this time? Not for injury or anything. It's basically he's on the sideline and didn't really do anything, of course, last night. So that question, of course, is going to be asked. And first of all, Florida didn't run a whole lot of plays. I forget what it was off the top, 55, maybe, right off the top of my head. Something like that. 55 plays around there. And then, I mean, Franks had 10 rushes. P. Ryan had 10 rushes. Franks had 7 rushes. Tony 3 touches. Pierce 3 touches. Davis 3 touches. Just not a lot. Not a lot there. Honestly, there you had 27 attempts, but not enough there behind really P. Ryan and Franks, but receivers as well. And a lot of people were kind of pointing to that, and some people still wanted Kadarius Toney to get more touches. But I mean, look, Van Jefferson only had 1. Tyree Cleveland only had 1. Trevon Grimes only had 1. So there just really wasn't a lot of plays out there for the ball to get distributed.
Do you happen to have the play sheet in front of you, the stat sheet in front of you for Kadarius Toney?
I do. Let's see.
Didn't he have a negative play?
Yeah, the one of the sweeps was a negative play.
On that play, did he sort of like run around a little bit before it became a negative play?
He did run around. I watched the game a couple hours ago. He did. He took the sweep. He was hit first behind. I mean, he was hit behind the line of scrimmage first, but I mean, it wasn't like a lot of zigzag run or anything.
Okay. Because I think that's the fear with him, is that they still have that fear where it's going to end up as that sort of negative play, because that's something that Dan Mullen brought up during the press conference, and I meant to check that out. I think that was one of like the few plays that I didn't rewatch from the game. But yeah, that's kind of the issue with him. But still, like, you still want to see him get more touches than that, especially when, look, it's a high percentage play in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's not a sure thing, but again, we've heard so many times Dan Mullen say good things happen when the ball's in his hands. Well, get the ball to his hands a little bit more, because we saw him pull off the biggest play in Feleipe Franks' throwing history off a screen, and it went for a long touchdown for you. And so that's obvious. The thing with Jacob Copeland, I feel like something has to be a little bit explained, is that like when you get players talking about other players in training camp, 99.99% of the time, they're going to say some positive stuff about that player if you ask them about that player. And so I think that largely happened with Jacob Copeland, is that a lot of players were asked about him because he was healthy in training camp, and he wasn't 100% earlier in his career. And so people in media, myself included, were interested to and curious to kind of see like, okay, like how's this working out? What's he look like? What's his upside? Because he's a hugely important player for you in 2020. But that room is so deep that you don't really need a guy like him right now, and so I don't really anticipate him being that big of a part of the offense, at least right now. Maybe that changes, but I just don't see it because you have so many playmakers on this team already, that you know what you're getting out of them. They're reliable. They're pretty consistent. So it's just I just don't see a path right there. So that there's that aspect. The one guy who I will point out that I wanted to see a lot more of was Grimes. I felt like they should have got him involved in the play calling a little bit more. I mentioned on that interception that I think he was behind the line of scrimmage, so he could have, there could have been a screen call for him on there, and maybe he could have made things happen on his own. But he was one of those guys that I would have liked to have seen included a little bit more. And I will say, though, that they did try to go with those one-on-ones early on. The first game, there was a play-action play, deep pass for Van Jefferson, and Feleipe Franks makes an overthrow out of bounds. So it's not as if that they completely forgot about that or didn't try it. It's like, how many times do you want to try that and get behind the sticks, or go second and long, third and long, when, oh, by the way, your running game isn't all that successful either.
All right, we'll get to the next one here from Rocket Man House. Says, we need more discipline, break down when you tackle, and avoid stupid penalties. Franks hasn't made the jump we expected, and the team was overconfident. Where was the push in the run game? So a couple of things there, of course. Discipline, we already mentioned tackling, but yes, there were some penalties there, some inexcusable penalties, hits out of bounds. Some questionable pass interference calls. I thought some of them were legit, some of them kind of ticky-tacky there. You get that a lot too, with refs, some ticky-tacky calls. So I thought it was called ticky-tacky equally on both sides. So I think both fan bases could probably feel the same way about the refs, except for that final drive there for Florida. It was a little ticky-tacky there for me in that situation. One topic I did want to hit on was the offensive line. They asked, where was the push in the run game? Overall, I thought the offensive line played well. They pass blocked better than I expected them to pass block. And I thought with the lack of experience and kind of that they would be able to run the ball a little easier. That when you're in a young offensive line, at least being, especially in Dan Mullen's offense, being able to run the ball with an offensive line is kind of priority one, and it's easier to teach that, I think. There's not a lot of reaction. You just go do your job there. But I was a little surprised, even as good as I thought that Miami front was, that Florida wasn't able to get more and more from the offensive line in ways of push and opening holes for the running backs.
Yeah, it's paramount in Dan Mullen's spread offense to get that running game going, but Manny Diaz knows that, and his defense was reflective of that knowledge. And they stacked the box with at least 7 guys most of the time there, ready to make a play and snuffing out runs. They kind of made a lot of good reads on some run plays, kind of snuffed things out. And the person who tweeted you is correct. I mean, they just didn't get much of a push at all. They got beat a lot of times. I know a couple of times in particular on the right side, it wasn't pretty. And then some plays were just slow to develop, David. I think that too, it just, I'm trying to find the right word. Maybe disjointed is the right word for it, just because it was just a little bit slow to get going. And that's largely expected with I don't want to say a completely new group because they've been practicing for a while, but this was their first game together, at least first live game together against a different team. So there's that aspect of it that can't get neglected. And so, that's big. And that's, I think, really, as simple as it sounds, that's really the issue there. So it's like they got beat there, and that was expected as to some extent. But I think the fear was that this would be. I think the nightmare was that it would be a catastrophe, and it wasn't that, at least. So that at least was the bright side for Florida.
All right, I'll read one more, and I'll throw some tweets out for the next episode as well that I'll record with Will Miles tomorrow. Last one for this episode. Bull Gators says, as much as I hate to admit it, I think that Desmond Howard may have been correct. It looked as if the Gators did not take Miami seriously. like they bought into their own hype and were not sharp. That said, this game provides a lot of teachable moments for the next 2 weeks. Well, I did discuss, before on this podcast, probably within the last couple of weeks, that this was new territory for Florida, and Michael Pirine, he even spoke to it as well. That when the polls came out, Florida's a top 10 team, and not something they're haven't really been pegged as going into a season since his time at Florida, and this was something new. So the hope is, they don't read into the hype a lot. They don't, they don't get complacent because of everybody's saying how good they're supposed to be and they're a top 10 team. But look, there's still a lot of work to be done, and the quote out there, it's harder to. Once you're up there at the top or near the top, it's harder to stay there once you get there. And last year it may be easier to build up and that, and you can't get complacent. And with the situation these guys have been in, from Jim McElwain to Mullen and winning last year, you can't be satisfied with what happened last year going into this season being in top 10 and really take things for granted. I'm not saying that was the issue, not really saying that's what happened, but as you can see, there are some in the fan base that actually feel that way.
Yeah, to me, that's just too convenient of a narrative for my taste, just because I mean, like, what do you want them to say? Because at the same time, you're like, okay, it's refreshing that Dan Mullen is playing this game up, that he's not saying it's just another game, that he's, taking in the significance of the game, and they're confident in their approach, and all that stuff is great. Well, you can't have it really both ways, and then say when they don't necessarily perform up to a certain level that they took it for granted, or that they're too confident or overly confident, especially when like a lot of these guys are working after practice. So it's not as if like these guys are complacent or mailing it in or just saying like, hey, we're top 10, let's get out of it, let's get out of here. That's just not happening. So it's like, where does it manifest? Like, where does that overconfidence manifest? Like, where do you see that translated, and how does it translate in their approach? I'm not sure about that, because these guys are staying late out of practice. We see it all the time. Everybody tweets about it every single time. So, I mean, and it's not as if like this was a shocker, like that they're, Dan Enos's playbook or his offensive play calling was a shocker to them. I mean, I had a conversation with David Reese about their ability to read screens, and same thing with Kyrie Campbell. It's not as if it wasn't on these guys' minds. It's just sometimes it's just not going to work out for you. And so I think it's just too convenient of a narrative to sort of say like, okay, these are, we're overconfident and we got to plug ourselves in and refocus and this or that, because largely this team was really focused. I mean, I asked Lucas Krull after practice, like, okay, man, like tight ends weren't that big of a focal point of the offense. Like, what are you sort of curious about? And he's like, I'm not curious about anything. We're going to dominate. And like, that's a little bit of arrogance and cockiness, sure, but I mean, he just said it in a way that like it was coming from the right place. Maybe I'm not articulating that too well, but I think he was confident, and a lot of these guys were confident because they put the work in, and so it wasn't like their confidence was from in any way misplaced. It was coming from a place where they had the right preparation for it. So I don't know. For my taste, it's just too convenient of a narrative, and just something that's just, again, like one of our overall sort of messages for this episode was just, it's easy to kind of just overreact, and I think that you can easily formulate some narratives based on an overreaction when it's just there's just a simpler reasoning for things.
Yep, and we'll put a bow on this episode. Will, thanks for coming in. We'll do this every Sunday after the Gators play a game, and we'll have a lot of fun with it. And at least they could hear us talk about a win and not a loss for the listeners out there. And Will, I'm sure now one game played, you have a lot of content coming out on The Athletic.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. I did a story on just like what America saw from the Florida Gators, because I think for like a month, a lot of people were interested. Like, okay, who are these guys? Are they good enough to be top 10? What are they all about? And sure, they're flawed, but they're pretty entertaining too at the same time. So I kind of went down the list of like, who are these guys, and sort of like new faces and a couple of the old faces on this team that sort of make up who they are, and just kind of built some details and some anecdotes around that. So that's up now at theathletic.com. And I also do an exit survey after every game, sort of reviewing in more detail sort of what we learned from the game. And I bring on a guest who's sort of affiliated with Florida. And so for this one coming up, I have Nick Smith, the former UF linebacker, who, of course, had to medically retire in January, Orlando native as well. So it made a lot of sense. And his good friend Ventrell Miller showed out, so it made a lot of sense for me to include him. So he gave me his takes on the game, and we went over just sort of basically what we learned from there. And throughout the week, we'll have some more good stuff on theathletic.com.
All right, and make sure you download that app too. Great content out there from Will and the crew. My final thought here, I think we still learn more about this team than we learn more in a sloppy, hard-fought win versus a good team with a good defense than we would have ever learned versus a cupcake like we had last year. So I say learn from it, go to work. You definitely get better from it. And if Florida's as good as we think they can be, then this should serve as a wake-up call. So we'll take it from there, and we'll get a bye week and a cupcake, and then get ready for Kentucky. So, next couple of weeks. I don't know. You got to after one big game and a bye week, then we have Cupcake City.
We're due, man. I mean, it is what it is. At least the anxiety for a lot of fans will be out. So take the good and the bad.
Exactly. All right. That's Will Sammon. You can find his work at The Athletic. I'm the host of Gators Breakdown, David Waters. You can find me on Twitter at GatorDave_SCC. Guys and girls out there, thanks for listening to this episode of Gators Breakdown.